Tansego magantik prescribe netsigasan kinaseo CPU chinia how konabi togahe amani amachiabi chega again agetchataya hivi. My name is Dr. Chris Scribe. I am the founder and executive director of Walks First Educational Consulting. I'm also the founder and executive director of the not-for-profit Think Indigenous events. One of the things that happens when we're like just as human beings and just being interested and passionate about different things, we find like-minded people and we have like-minded conversations about, what can we do to improve the field in which we're in. So for myself, I'm an educator. I have dedicated my life to, education and specifically Indigenous education. Love classroom teaching. My favorite job, throughout my entire life is teaching middle years. And, that's not everybody's cup of tea, but, I've always enjoyed, the banter, the conversations, and the authentic learning that happens when you actually, meet that space. But I was always somehow dragged out of the classroom and put into different leadership positions, whether it be a vice principal, acting principal, or into those administrative positions. Oh, not my favorite thing to do, but a necessary thing. And when I started to think about how we get into these conversations, we'd sit in a staff room and we'd have conversations with our colleagues about Indigenous education, Indigenous control of Indian education, like all of these different ideas and different thought processes. And, it was always really enlightening, but it was only ever conversation. Where I started and thought about the idea of Think Indigenous happened, when I was teaching a grade 9 class at Chief Palmaker School in Treaty 6 territory. And, I went to a conference, I was able to go to a conference, and man, it was the same thing. And I'm like, man, we can do this differently. And instead of talking about it, I sat around with some like-minded people and some friends of mine and thought, okay, so what does it look like for a conference to do something different? What does it look like to do things through a different lens, an Indigenous lens that's relevant to us working in the classroom on the ground? And this concept of thinking Indigenous, in Cree we would say, "Nehi almamtanechigan," to think through a Cree lens. We'd think about that. And we'd have these conversations and these grand ideas. And, you know, we'd all leave after coffee. We'd all go back to our jobs in different places. And, just one day I said, man, that's it. Let's just do it. So, we created this idea of a event called Think Indigenous to bring people forward and bring people into the space to really look at how they can approach education by thinking Indigenous. And it blew up, man. It blew up to you know 2,000 people attending a international conference, online events, and like all kinds of different things happened from there. When we think about like the path that's laid forward from an Indigenous lens, we have this idea, there's a path for us to take. And as human beings, we can decide to take it or not take it. For me, I was working in the oil field in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and really thought about this concept of making money, and having this because we grew up and we didn't have a lot of extra money. My grandmother, she raised me, and an amazing person. And when we were younger, I said, how much money do you make every year? And she gave me this number of $16,000. And I thought, man, is that ever lots, man? That's so much money. And nowadays I'm thinking, man, how did we survive? How did she pay bills? How did she have money to go and give to, people that needed it? It was amazing how she could, manage all of that. So when I was working on the rigs, I collected, and started making a lot of cash. I got home at Christmas at a breakup for the oil rigs. I got home and I sat down with my grandmother and I told her, I said, anything you want, whatever you want. I said, I'll buy it for you. You want a new car? You want new regalia? I said, you want to go on a trip? I just like, here it is. Had all this money in the bank. And she looked at me and she said, my boy, she said, I want to tell you something. She told me a story. She told me a story about her her life in residential school. And at Christmas time, because she combed the nun's hair and, was a good student, that for Christmas she got two licorice rock candies. One of them she kept every single day, and she had one lick every day. The other one she put aside and kept it. And she was, 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old at this time. So, I have a 7-year old daughter, and I think about, them keeping one candy, for however long. She said, "Oh, my boy, I remember the last lick." She said, "It was a sliver and it disappeared on my tongue." She said, "The other one," she said, "I kept it." So this was Christmas time, and by the time of the end of the school year, they were driven back from Brandon to Assiniboine Reserve. So she went and was dropped off at the edge of the reservation, and her brother met her there. Had two horses. One horse had his saddle on it; the other was bareback. And her brother George allowed her to ride the saddled horse. It was a big deal. It was a big deal for her. She always mentioned that. And they rode the horse back. And as they were riding back, they met up with her father. And her father, at that time, because my grandmother's mom had passed away from childbirth, was the one raising them. So their father was raising these children by himself, and again with the oldest son that he had, George. And my grandmother ran up to him, this little girl coming from this residential school experience, and how much love and kindness she had for her father. She ran up to him and hugged him. She looked at him and she reached in her pocket and she pulled out that licorice rock candy. And she looked at him and she put this candy and she told him, "This is for you. I got this at Christmas. I saved it for you because it's so good and I wanted to give you this." And her dad looked at her and just seeing how much love and kindness that was there, and it made him feel so good. He just started to cry and he thanked his little girl so much. So my grandmother tells me this story and she looks at me sitting across the table and she says, "I know now," she said, "how my dad felt at that time by what you're trying to do for me, my boy." And she looked at me and she said, "But I'm going to ask you a question." She said, "Were you happy growing up?" And I looked at her. I said, "Yes, I was." I said, "It was the best." I said, "You were the best at raising me. And I had so much love and, happiness here." She said, "We didn't have very much money," she said. "Money isn't everything," she told me. And she said, "I want you to take that money that you worked hard for. I want you to spend it on yourself. I want you to take that money. I want you to do something for yourself. Me, my boy, I have everything I need." And I looked at her and I thought, man, you should have told me this before I went and endured this experience at, the oil rigs, and how tough it is physically, mentally. Like it is a rough experience. You make a lot of money, but you develop, a really thick skin. You develop a really hardworking attitude. And, I wish you told me this before, it was kind of that. And afterwards, I was thinking about it. Man, I got a phone call. My cousin was running a teacher education program, and she said, "I have one seat available in our community. It's yours if you want it." Now, I'm a status Indian. I have, ancestors who were signatories to Treaty 4, and Treaty 4 has the education clause. We get education as a result of sharing this land and living in this land together. And I was not getting funded. I was on a waiting list where 180 people were ahead of me. But I had money in my bank account because of the drilling and the oil rig work that I had. So that I was able to use and move forward and start my education career. And the path just moved from there. So like I said, we can choose the path that's laid for us, the doors that open. For me, that was the door that opened that moved me towards that and made that happen. I have a Bachelor of Education through the ITEP program, a Master's of Education in Educational Administration, and I have a PhD in Educational Administration. And the path that leads us to these places and the path that gets us there is different for every person. For me, the path that led me down this way and this forward was that we have so much knowledge as Indigenous people that could help and support all students and all children in this land and this territory, regardless of race. like the knowledge that exists here on our territories is meant for those that walk, live, and breathe on these territories. And our knowledge keepers and wisdom keepers, a lot of them don't have Western education, but they have PhD equivalents in terms of the Indigenous knowledge that they possess, the stories, the songs, the dances, like everything that exists that we have is at a PhD level, but it's not recognized in this modern world. I was raised, experiencing and being a part of ceremony, being a part of Indigenous knowledge my entire life, surrounded by language, surrounded by knowledge keepers. And all of that experience is valued by Indigenous people. But stepping into the Western world, they don't see letters behind my name. So, one of the things that guided me and moved me forward towards going forward and doing this was this idea of saying that I could reach the maximum level of Western education. And I can honestly say, without a doubt in my mind and heart and soul, that that is much easier to obtain than that of Indigenous knowledge that I have spent my entire life trying to get and grasp. So the path towards this, the path to creating this idea of Indigenous education was a PhD in this is to say that when I speak, you have to listen to me because I have the same amount of education as every single person in here, if not more. And I'm telling you that that fails in comparison to the Indigenous knowledge that I've collected throughout my entire life that I'm still aspiring to learn. It really is paying homage to, somebody really, really important to me that I never had the opportunity to meet or know or, have a conversation with. And that's Nimoshim, my grandfather. His name was Murdo Scribe. He had a grade 6 industrial school education, but he had a PhD in the land. He had a PhD in the water, anatomy, the stars, everything that you can experience on this land. He transcended his life as a hunter, fisher, trapper and started educating students and people all throughout the southern parts of Manitoba. And in his time there, he shared knowledge, stories, legends that were just phenomenal. He was an award-winning children's author. He did all of this amazing work. And, sadly, he passed away from cancer when I was 3 years old. So the pursuit of this education is honoring my grandfather to continue his legacy in incorporating Indigenous knowledge in our school systems and kicking the door open every chance I can to say, look, you got to listen to me, man. One of the things about running a not for profit is this idea of giving back, this idea of doing that. But running an Indigenous nonprofit, it just puts a magnifying glass on how are you giving back? Are you doing this, through sustainability? Are you doing this with, the proper reciprocity? Are you doing this through ceremony? Like there's a big lens on it. And one of the things that we did when I founded Think Indigenous was I wanted to create this idea of giving back, but not giving back to the adults in this world and, providing, the people that have already means in their lives, but giving back to our young people. And how do we do that? If they're struggling with sports or like obtaining a lot of these different things, providing experiences to learn to present, to learn to public speak. So it just expanded. So we created the not for profit, not really quite understanding what that meant, but then also just understanding how do we give back naturally as Indigenous people and we give back to the younger generation. So that was the premise of doing that, is that this reciprocity, this cycle of giving back constantly. The other thing is, how are we generating revenue, to come in to support, whatever programs that we're supporting, or answering any calls that we can do or presentations that, people request. How is the revenue generated? And we wanted to keep it super simple. We didn't ever want it to make this multi-million dollar piece. We also didn't want to take from federal grant monies that people in our communities are fighting for and they're applying for. So we never filled out a grant application, and we never took any dollars from any land destroying industry. And that was just so that Think Indigenous, our not for profit, all the money generated comes from the events that we offer through the community registration fees that gets funneled back out to community. It's not the best business plan in the world. It's not one of those things where, you're gonna have, $100,000 sitting, and it's not one of those. It's just, it comes in and goes. It's really like how my grandmother lived her life, that as soon as she got any kind of money that came into her bank account, and she gave that out to people, whether it be her children, her grandchildren, her great grandchildren, to visitors that would come, she'd load them up with groceries and send it out. It's just using that Indigenous Nehiyao Mamtene Chiganda thinking Indigenous way of doing things, and just providing that out to the community. So I think if we think about a not for profit from an Indigenous perspective, that's the business plan for Think Indig. Just in terms of like Walks First Consulting, we have to. For me, I live in a city. We have to survive. That's the way this modern world is. So part of the Walks First Consulting is just providing educational consulting services to people who need it, and offering those as this service for people that going to hopefully benefit our people in our communities, but it'll also help us in paying our bills, and that's what Walks First, consulting does, is that we take these on. We offer dance programs. We offer, just different services from my personal experience in education, and providing those as a means to support my family and support our, like the things that we want to do and the sports that my children partake in and the powwows that we travel to. So there's that piece that's necessary too in our lives. The thing about creating a consulting, and being an entrepreneur in that space, is that I don't have to answer to an institution. I am the institution. You become the end of the boss of the thing. So I mean, this is the reality of creating that space. We've had this idea of a 9 to 5, workday. We create this. I read Henry Ford, talked about creating this, 5-day work week, and all of these different things that we're told what work is supposed to look like. Who says? Who's to decide that? Who tells us that? I mean, yeah, if we work for somebody, and somebody, an institution, or if we work anywhere in this world, they have a set hours and a number of time. But when you're an entrepreneur, or when you're doing work on your own, whether it be for the not-for-profit that I run in Think and Dig, or my own consulting, which is Walks First, whatever that is, it really depends on the time that you want to put into this work. For me, my day to day, what that looks like really depends on my availability to say, okay, when am I free to do this work, when I'm not watching my 2 younger kids at my house, or when we're not doing ceremony, or we're not doing those other things, when can I do that? So some days, my days are when every kid goes to sleep in my house, and I'm up working, from 9 p.m. till 12. Some days it's, working a full day. Some days it's not working at all, and it's just really concentrating on family. So it's really flexible. What does the workday look like? It's inconsistent. It's not something that is easily, put onto a schedule. Like it's one of those things that you create the space to do quality work, and when you're done the quality work, then you go do, the heart work. And heart, HEART, for your children, for your families, and the stuff that's meaningful to you, you move that forward as well. I love the fact that I get to spend time with my family on important things while they're young, while they're little, that I get to decide the hours that I do, that nobody's telling me that I have to do this, this, and this, and this. I decide which contracts that I want to take. I decide, which stuff really speaks to me. And what I really love is I get to pick and choose the stuff that's going to make a difference for our community. I don't have to work on things that I don't believe in. I work on things that I believe in, man. I work on things that, I feel are going to be beneficial to our communities, that are going to make a difference, that are going to change the realities of this province. That's what I get to choose. That's the biggest thing about why I love the work I do. We get asked this question a lot about, what advice would we give to young people, or what advice would we give to, our younger selves, or, like that question. Been asked that a few times, and I've been asked that by entrepreneurs. So it must be in a entrepreneur like to-do guide or something, but the best advice that I can give to our young people is experience life. Find out and take advantage of the experiences that life offer you in healthy ways, of course. Like, what are the experiences in traveling to some place where, your parents, or, your friends, or you just go and experience that on your own? What is that going to teach you? Experience something that you haven't done before. Work in an area or a field that you haven't done before. Because all those experiences help and guide us to find the work that we're destined to find. So, what does that look like for young people? It's stepping out of your comfort zone, looking at and taking on, things that you might not always do, and going and experiencing it. The other thing that I mentioned when people ask this question about, what advice would we give, is that don't try and be perfect. There is no perfect person on this earth. Every single person makes mistakes. But the advice that I give is, what are you going to learn from the mistakes that you make? What are you going to do with how you make those mistakes, and what's going to change in the future? We have a term in the Cree language called Kehteyak. The Kehteyak are our elders, our knowledge keepers, are the oldest ones. And they're the ones that educate and teach all of us what to do and how to live, and, all of these things, not because they know the most, not because they lived a perfect life. It's because those people made the most mistakes in their life. And it's their job to share the mistakes that they made, so that we as younger generations don't make them moving forward. And one day, each and every one of us are going to graduate to this place of Kehteyak. And it's our turn to share, all the mistakes we made in life, and the hopes and dreams that our young people don't make them. So, don't get down on yourself if things don't work out. If you make a mistake, you fail. What you do with that failure, what you do with that mistake, what you do in your life moving forward beyond that, that's what matters. That's the best advice that I can give.